This video will take you on a journey through one of the world's longest and most explosive conflicts: Israel, Palestine, and Iran. In the next 2 hours, you'll discover the ancient roots of this struggle, the wars that reshaped the Middle East, the rise of powerful ideologies, and the shocking events, like October 7th, that still shape our world today. If you've ever wondered why peace in the Middle East always slips away, no matter how close it seems, then stay with us. By the end of this film, you'll see the conflict in a way you've never seen before. To understand today's headlines, we must go back thousands of years, long before rockets, tanks, and politics. This land was once home to the world's earliest civilizations: the Canaanites, the Babylonians, the Persians. Each empire left its mark. Each faith claimed it as sacred.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
For the Jewish people, this was the promised land, given by God to Abraham and his descendants. For Christians, it was the land where Jesus lived, died, and rose again. For Muslims, it became the site of Muhammad's night journey and one of Islam's holiest places. 3 faiths, 1 land, and a seed of conflict planted. Over centuries, conquests and crusades turned Jerusalem into a battlefield. The Romans scattered the Jews, but they never forgot their homeland. Muslims established mighty caliphates, while Christians fought bloody wars to reclaim the holy city. Every victory, every loss, only deepened the question: who does this land truly belong to? That question would not fade. Instead, it would pass through centuries, waiting for a moment in modern history to explode. And when it did, the entire world would be dragged into the fire. The story of the Middle East begins not with modern borders or UN resolutions, but with some of the earliest civilizations known to man. This land, wedged between rivers, deserts, and seas, was the crossroads of empire, faith, and ambition. Here, around 3000 BC, the Canaanites settled in the Levant. To the east, Babylonians rose with laws and language that still echo today. To the south, Egypt built pyramids as eternal monuments. And in the middle, Palestine, Jerusalem, and the valleys of the Jordan was a land caught between giants. A land so small, yet so contested. Why? Because it was not just geography, it was destiny. According to the Hebrew Bible, God promised this land to Abraham and his descendants. For the Jewish people, it became the promised land, a covenant written not on maps, but in faith. Kingdoms of Israel and Judah rose here, building the first temple in Jerusalem under King Solomon. But empires coveted it. Assyrians, then Babylonians conquered. The first temple was destroyed. Thousands of Jews were exiled. Yet even in exile, they whispered one vow: next year in Jerusalem. Centuries later, Christianity was born here, when Jesus of Nazareth walked its dusty roads. To Christians, this land became sacred ground, the birthplace of salvation. Roman crucifixion, resurrection, and the spread of a new faith turned Jerusalem into a global spiritual capital. But with faith came rivalry. The Romans crushed Jewish revolts, destroying the Second Temple in 70 AD. The Jews scattered, but never forgot, and Christians soon clashed with pagans, Jews, and later, Muslims. In the 7th century, a new voice emerged from Arabia, Prophet Muhammad. Within decades, Islam spread like wildfire, uniting tribes, creating caliphates, and reaching Jerusalem. To Muslims, this city became home to Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, where Muhammad's night journey ascended to heaven. Now 3 faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all claimed the same land as holy. 3 truths, 3 promises, but only one city. The fuse of future conflict was lit. For centuries, Jerusalem was traded in blood. Crusaders marched under the cross to liberate it. Muslim generals like Saladin reclaimed it. The Ottoman Turks ruled it for 400 years, blending tolerance with control. Every empire added layers of faith, law, and memory, none willing to let go. But history has a way of collapsing empires. And when the Ottomans finally fell, the land didn't just become a question of faith. It became a question of power, politics, and survival. The stage was set. The ancient roots had been planted. And when the modern world came knocking, the seeds of faith, conquest, and exile would erupt into wars that still burn today. For nearly 4 centuries, one empire held sway over the heart of the Middle East, the Ottomans. From the 1500s until World War I, the Ottoman Turks controlled Palestine, Jerusalem, and the lands we now call Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The Ottomans were not perfect rulers, but they brought relative stability. Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived side by side under their millet system, a hierarchy that allowed religious minorities to exist, though often with restrictions. Taxes were heavy, corruption was common, but compared to the chaos of previous centuries, life in the Holy Land was more predictable. For generations, Jews maintained small communities here, especially in Jerusalem and Safed. But the majority of the population was Arab farmers, traders, Bedouin tribes. Few could have imagined how quickly this balance would be shattered. By the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire was weakening. Europeans called it the sick man of Europe. France and Britain competed for influence. Russia sought warm water ports. And slowly, foreign eyes turned toward Palestine. Not for its riches, but for its spiritual and strategic importance. Missionaries, archaeologists, and consuls arrived, digging not just for artifacts, but for influence. Beneath the surface, a new age of nationalism was brewing, both Arab and Jewish. In Europe, Jews faced centuries of persecution, pogroms in Russia, anti-Semitism in France. Out of this suffering, Zionism was born, the idea that Jews must return to their ancient homeland. Led by visionaries like Theodor Herzl, Jewish immigrants began arriving in Ottoman Palestine in the late 1800s, buying land, building farms, reviving Hebrew. To Zionists, this was rebirth. To Arabs, it was unsettling. Many feared their land and way of life were being quietly taken. Tensions simmered, but the real explosion would come with war. In 1914, World War I erupted. The Ottomans sided with Germany, sealing their fate. Britain saw an opportunity to dismantle Ottoman control, and with it, redraw the map of the Middle East. Britain promised Arab leaders, like Sharif Hussein of Mecca, that if they revolted against the Ottomans, they would be rewarded with an independent Arab kingdom after the war. But behind closed doors, Britain and France were making very different promises. 3 promises, 3 betrayals. To the Arabs, independence. To the French, secret division of Ottoman lands under the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And in 1917, to the Jews, the Balfour Declaration, Britain's pledge to support a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. One land promised to 3 peoples, a recipe for chaos. By 1918, the Ottomans collapsed. Britain took Palestine as a mandate under the League of Nations. For the first time in centuries, the Holy Land was under Western control. To Jews, this was hope. To Arabs, betrayal. The seeds of modern conflict were now deeply planted. The old empire had died, but the promises of war had left behind a trap that would explode in the 20th century and still ensnare the world today. Next, the birth of modern conflict, the creation of Israel, the Nakba, and the wars that reshaped everything. The Second World War ended with cities in ruins and millions dead. Among the deepest scars was the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered in Nazi death camps. For survivors, the dream of a safe homeland was no longer just hope. It was survival. Palestine, then under British rule, became the destination for thousands of Jewish refugees. But Britain, caught between Jewish immigration and Arab resistance, struggled to keep order. Violence erupted. Arab attacks on settlers, Jewish underground militias striking back, British soldiers caught in the middle. Every new arrival intensified the question: could 2 peoples share one land? In 1947, the world tried to answer. The United Nations proposed partition. Palestine would be divided into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jerusalem would remain international, belonging to neither. Jews, though divided, accepted. For them, it was a step toward sovereignty. But Arabs rejected it outright. To them, it was theft, a foreign body carving their land without consent. The vote passed, and with it, the fuse was lit. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the birth of the State of Israel. For Jews, it was the rebirth of a nation exiled for 2,000 years. A miracle, a refuge, a promise fulfilled. But for Palestinians, it was the beginning of catastrophe.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
In the war that followed, over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Villages were destroyed. Families scattered across refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Gaza. Palestinians call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. To this day, the memory of lost homes and keys passed down through generations remains the core of Palestinian identity. The day after Israel declared independence, 5 Arab armies invaded Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. They promised to drive the new Jewish state into the sea. Outnumbered, Israel fought desperately. Yet, against all odds, they not only survived, they gained more land than the UN had granted. For Israelis, it was victory. For Arabs, humiliation. For Palestinians, it meant statelessness. The birth of Israel and the Nakba were not just events, they were turning points. 2 peoples now claimed the same land, both with unshakable narratives of justice, survival, and loss. Neither was willing to surrender. From this moment forward, peace would always mean sacrifice. And for decades to come, Every attempt at peace would lead instead to war. Next, the wars that defined the Middle East, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and the rise of resistance that still shakes the world today. Israel was born into fire. From the very beginning, it was both a miracle and a fortress. Politically, it was led by David Ben-Gurion and later figures like Golda Meir and Menachem Begin, leaders hardened by exile, war, and survival. Militarily, Israel quickly became one of the most formidable powers in the region, building an army that could strike faster and harder than its neighbors. Its economy, boosted by U.S. aid and Jewish immigration, transformed deserts into cities and farmland. But survival came at a cost. Every military triumph meant new enemies. Every expansion meant deeper resentment. For Palestinians, 1948 was not independence, it was exile. Hundreds of thousands became refugees. Camps turned into cities of despair. Out of this displacement, a new identity was forged. Palestinians as a stateless nation, demanding return and recognition. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, was formed in 1964. Under Yasser Arafat, it became the voice of a people without borders, sometimes through diplomacy, often through armed struggle. To Israel, the PLO was terrorism. To Palestinians, it was resistance. While the Arab-Israeli conflict raged, Iran entered the stage in 1979 with its Islamic Revolution. The Shah, once a U.S. ally, was overthrown. Ayatollah Khomeini declared a new vision, an Islamic republic hostile to Israel and the West. Iran became a patron of resistance, backing groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and later Hamas in Gaza. From this moment, the conflict was no longer just Arabs versus Israelis. It became a regional struggle, with Iran as a key player. Egypt, Jordan, and Syria each played decisive roles. Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser championed Pan-Arabism, the dream of one united Arab world, with Palestine at its heart. Jordan held the West Bank and East Jerusalem until 1967, while Syria sought to reclaim the Golan Heights. For decades, Arab leaders promised to liberate Palestine. But after each war, Palestinians felt more betrayed, more alone. These players, the Israelis, the Palestinians, Iran, and the Arab states, would define every battle, every negotiation, every failure. And soon, the battlefield would erupt again in wars that redrew the map. In June 1967, tensions boiled over. Surrounded by Arab armies, Israel launched a preemptive strike. In just 6 days, it destroyed Egypt's air force, crushed Jordanian defenses, and humiliated Syria. The result? Israel seized the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. Jerusalem was reunited under Jewish control for the first time in 2,000 years. But for Arabs, it was a disaster, a wound that would fuel decades of revenge. 6 years later, Egypt and Syria struck back on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism. At first, Israel was caught off guard. Arab forces poured across the Suez Canal and into the Golan. For a moment, it seemed Israel might fall. But Israel recovered, pushing back. The war ended in stalemate, but its shockwaves shook the world. Oil prices quadrupled. Arab nations gained new pride. And the U.S. became Israel's ultimate lifeline. By the 1980s, Palestinian frustration exploded. In 1987, the First Intifada, An uprising of stones, strikes, and protests spread through the West Bank and Gaza. Israel responded with force, deepening anger. In 2000, the Second Intifada erupted after failed peace talks, this time bloodier, with suicide bombings and military crackdowns. The cycle of violence seemed endless, children growing up knowing only war. For a brief moment, there was hope. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed the Oslo Accords. Palestinians would gain limited self-rule. Peace seemed within reach. But extremists on both sides opposed it. Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli hardliner. Suicide bombings shattered trust. Settlements expanded. Oslo collapsed, leaving both peoples bitter and broken. In Gaza, Hamas rose to power, an Islamist movement rejecting Israel's existence. Wars erupted in 2008, 2012, 2014, and beyond. Each round left Gaza in ruins, Israel scarred by rockets, and peace further away than ever. The Middle East was no longer a conflict of armies. It was now an endless cycle of rockets, bombs, and broken promises. And yet, the greatest shocks were still to come. October 7, 2023. A day that would change everything. It was a Saturday morning, October 7, 2023. For Israelis, it was the holiday of Simchat Torah, a day of joy. For Palestinians in Gaza, it was another day under blockade. And then, everything changed. At dawn, Hamas launched an unprecedented attack. Thousands of rockets rained down on southern Israel. Militants poured through breaches in the border wall. They stormed towns, homes, and military bases. At a music festival, young people dancing under the open sky suddenly ran for their lives as gunmen opened fire. By nightfall, more than 1,200 people were dead. Israelis, foreign workers, even children. Over 240 were dragged into Gaza as hostages. It was the bloodiest day for Jews since the Holocaust. Israel was in shock. The world was stunned. In Gaza, the hostages, men, women, elderly, even infants, were hidden deep underground in tunnels, their fates unknown. Families waited in agony, clinging to hope. Israel responded with fury. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared, "We are at war." Airstrikes flattened neighborhoods in Gaza. The Israeli Defense Forces launched a ground invasion to dismantle Hamas. But every bomb, every raid, came with a cost. Thousands of Palestinian civilians were killed, entire districts reduced to rubble. The hostage crisis dragged on. Some were freed through delicate negotiations, others in daring military operations. But many remain unaccounted for. For Israelis, it was a national trauma. For Palestinians, it was another chapter of devastation. The October 7th attack shattered assumptions worldwide. Israel demanded solidarity. Yet, as its military campaign in Gaza intensified, sympathy for Palestinians surged. Images of destroyed neighborhoods and displaced families circled the globe. Protests erupted from Washington to Berlin, London to Jakarta. The October 7th attack shattered assumptions worldwide. Israel demanded solidarity. Yet, as its military campaign in Gaza intensified, sympathy for Palestinians surged. Images of destroyed neighborhoods and displaced families circled the globe. Protests erupted from Washington to Berlin, London to Jakarta. For decades, Western nations avoided formally recognizing a Palestinian state. But after October 7th and the devastation in Gaza, the political ground shifted. In 2024 and 2025, countries like Ireland, Spain, Norway, and even France and Britain moved to recognize Palestine officially. Canada debated its position. The United Nations General Assembly once again called for a two-state solution, with more urgency than ever. Yet confusion reigns. Some argue recognition will pressure Israel toward peace. Others warn it rewards terrorism and undermines negotiations. Israel feels betrayed by allies. Palestinians are divided between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. And nations across the globe are scratching their heads. October 7th was more than a single attack. It was a turning point, forcing the world to confront a question that has haunted generations. Can peace ever come to the Holy Land? Or is this conflict destined to burn forever? And as the dust settles, the world waits for an answer. After October 7th, the world was shaken. Israel mourned its dead. Gaza mourned its thousands. Nations scrambled to respond, but every answer led to more questions. In Washington, leaders declared support for Israel's right to defend itself. But on the streets of New York and Chicago, hundreds of thousands marched for Palestine. A divide emerged, not only between nations, but within them. In London, Paris, Berlin, similar scenes unfolded. Governments stood with Israel, but their citizens demanded recognition for Palestine. The world's capitals became battlegrounds of opinion. For decades, many nations hesitated to formally recognize a Palestinian state. But in the wake of the Gaza devastation, the tide shifted. Ireland, Spain, and Norway made the leap first. France followed. Then Britain, Israel's historic ally, joined the chorus. Even in Canada, debates shook Parliament, forcing leaders to confront the issue. For Palestinians, recognition was validation after generations of statelessness. But for Israel, it felt like betrayal, an abandonment in their moment of grief. Israeli officials accused Europe of legitimizing terror. The divide deepened. Recognition, once thought to be the pathway to peace, now risked becoming a new battlefield. The conflict has left the world scratching its head. Every nation wants peace, but no one agrees on what peace should look like. Should Gaza be rebuilt under Palestinian Authority control? Should Hamas be eliminated first? Can Israel feel secure if Palestine is independent? Can Palestinians trust peace if occupation continues? The United States pushes for cautious diplomacy. Europe pushes for recognition. Arab states push for justice. And yet, in the chaos, none have an answer. Meanwhile, Iran cheers Hamas as a resistance force. Saudi Arabia weighs normalization with Israel. Turkey shifts between mediator and critic. Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar juggle fragile peace talks with hostage negotiations. The region itself is torn between war and diplomacy. And so the question hangs in the air. Can peace ever come? Or is the Middle East doomed to repeat its cycle of war and revenge? Nations search for answers, but none dare make the sacrifice peace demands. The truth may be the hardest of all. Until both peoples see each other's pain as equal, there will be no peace. At the heart of the conflict lies an unshakable idea: nationalism. For Jews, it is Zionism, the belief that after centuries of exile and persecution, they have the right to a homeland in their ancient land. For Palestinians, it is the fight for their own nation on that very same land. Two peoples, two narratives, one land, each convinced their claim is just sacred and non-negotiable. Every attempt at peace collides with this truth. Neither side is willing to give up its dream of nationhood. In the mid-20th century, a new idea swept across the Arab world: Pan-Arabism. Its champion, Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, promised that only Arab unity could defeat Israel and restore dignity after colonialism. But the dream of unity was shattered in the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israel crushed 3 Arab armies in just 6 days. Arab pride collapsed, Pan-Arabism weakened, and into that vacuum, something even more powerful emerged: religion. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran sent shockwaves across the Middle East. Religion was no longer private, it was political, militant, revolutionary. Iran declared itself a champion of the oppressed, vowing to resist Israel and spread Islamic governance. Groups like Hezbollah and Hamas were born, movements that fused nationalism with faith. For them, the struggle was not just political, it was holy. Every battle became jihad, every martyr a saint. And on the Israeli side, religion, too, deepened the conflict. Jewish settlers saw the West Bank not as occupied land, but as God's promised inheritance. Sacred texts became blueprints for settlement. Politics turned biblical. Nationalism, Pan-Arabism, religion, each ideology has promised salvation. Each has fueled new wars. And together, they have created a conflict where compromise feels like betrayal and peace feels like surrender. These are not just wars of land or politics. They are wars of memory, identity, and belief. And as long as beliefs remain unshakable, the conflict remains unending. December 1987. A car crash in Gaza killed 4 Palestinians after being hit by an Israeli truck. It seemed like a simple accident. But to Palestinians, after years of occupation, checkpoints, and humiliation, it was the spark. The streets exploded. This was the first Intifada, an uprising unlike anything the Middle East had seen. It was not armies clashing, but ordinary people. Children throwing stones at soldiers, women organizing boycotts, neighborhoods rising in defiance. For Palestinians, it was a cry for dignity. For Israel, it was chaos. Israel cracked down hard: curfews, raids, mass detentions. Images of soldiers beating youths shocked the world. Suddenly, the conflict was no longer about distant leaders or closed-door negotiations. It was on television screens, unfiltered, every night. Out of the uprising came talks. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed. Israel recognized the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The PLO recognized Israel's right to exist. There was handshakes, hope, and even Nobel Peace Prizes. But peace was fragile. Settlements continued. Checkpoints multiplied. Extremists on both sides worked to sabotage the deal. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist, killed for daring to dream of peace. The dream of Oslo cracked, and with it, hope began to fade. September 2000. Ariel Sharon, a hardline Israeli politician, visited Jerusalem's most sensitive site, the Temple Mount, or Al-Aqsa, sacred to both Jews and Muslims. To Palestinians, it was provocation. To Israelis, a declaration of sovereignty. The city ignited. The Second Intifada was bloodier, deadlier, and more desperate than the first. Suicide bombings tore through Israeli cities. Israeli airstrikes and raids devastated Palestinian towns. More than 3,000 Palestinians and 1,000 Israelis died in just 5 years. It was no longer stones versus rifles. It was explosives, tanks, assassinations, and despair. Both peoples bled. Both peoples hardened. Trust dissolved completely. The intifadas were not just uprisings. They were cries from a people who felt unseen, and fears from a nation who felt under siege. Dignity for Palestinians, security for Israelis, two human needs locked in opposition. In the streets, in the camps, in the settlements, dignity became the battlefield. And until dignity is found for both peoples, the struggle will never end. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has never been just local. From the very beginning, it became a pawn in a much bigger game, the Cold War. The United States embraced Israel as a democratic ally. The Soviet Union armed Arab states, seeing them as partners against Western influence. Wars in the Middle East were proxy wars. American jets against Soviet tanks. Diplomacy at the UN Security Council frozen by Cold War vetoes. The battlefield of Gaza and Jerusalem echoed in Washington and Moscow. But it wasn't only weapons, it was oil. In 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, Arab states used their most powerful weapon, an oil embargo. Prices skyrocketed. Western economies shuddered. Suddenly, peace in the Middle East wasn't just about borders, it was about the global economy. From that moment, every world leader understood. A flare-up in Gaza or Jerusalem could shake the markets in Tokyo, London, and New York. The Holy Land is sacred not to one faith, but to three. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is a symbol. For Muslims worldwide, Al-Aqsa is Islam's third holiest site. For Christians, it is the place of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. For Jews, it is the eternal capital promised by God. Every spark in Jerusalem ignites emotions in churches, mosques, and synagogues from Cairo to California. It is not just politics, it is faith, and faith cannot be negotiated. In the 21st century, the conflict became tied to global terror. Al-Qaeda invoked Palestine to justify attacks like 9/11. ISIS used Jerusalem in its propaganda. Even lone attackers in Western cities have shouted its name. Every government, from Washington to Berlin to Jakarta, knows what happens in Gaza can echo in their streets. The conflict became not just a regional war, but a global security crisis. Today, the world is divided. For some, Israel is a democracy under siege. For others, Palestine is a nation denied justice. Governments take sides. Streets take sides. Social media amplifies anger. And the global system struggles to keep balance. From the Cold War to the oil shocks, from terror attacks to today's protests, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has shaped the world order. And the question now is, will it shape the world's future too? In a world already divided, a new drama unfolds at sea. The Freedom Flotilla, A coalition of international activists, aid groups, and volunteers sets sail toward Gaza. Its mission: to break Israel's naval blockade and deliver desperately needed humanitarian aid. They call their flagship Sumud, Arabic for steadfastness. To them, it is more than a ship. It is a symbol of defiance, a floating cry for justice. But this is no ordinary convoy. For the first time, European powers step in. Italy and Spain dispatch warships, not to attack but to escort the flotilla to guarantee it reaches Gaza. Their message: the humanitarian crisis can no longer be ignored. Yet, Israel has vowed the blockade will hold. Its navy patrols the coast, backed by one of the world's most advanced fleets. The Mediterranean becomes a chessboard, and every move could spark a confrontation with consequences far beyond Gaza. The world watches. Will the flotilla deliver aid or ignite a clash at sea? Could one miscalculation trigger a wider crisis, dragging Europe and the Middle East into direct confrontation? The stakes could not be higher. The Middle East conflict has always been more than lines on a map. It is a wound that never heals, a story that repeats itself through generations. From the ancient walls of Jerusalem to the modern skies over Gaza, the struggle has shaped history, and it continues to shape tomorrow. Decades of negotiations promised peace, but peace always slipped away. Each handshake gave hope. Each failure deepened despair. Today, both Israelis and Palestinians live in a cycle of fear, trauma, and mistrust. Nations choose sides. Streets choose sides. For some, Israel is a democracy under siege. For others, Palestine is a nation denied its rights. The truth? It is complex, painful, and rarely black and white. The future could bring another war, or the first real peace. It depends not just on leaders, but on people, ordinary voices refusing to let hatred win. The question is no longer whether the world will watch, but whether the world will act. Will nations choose courage over politics? Will ordinary people demand peace over bloodshed? The choice belongs to us all. For more than a century, the Middle East has been at the heart of the world's greatest struggles. Empires have fallen here. Nations have risen here. And every attempt at peace has left behind new scars. Today, Israelis live with the fear of rockets and terror. Palestinians live under siege, facing displacement and despair. Each side carries trauma so deep, it passes from one generation to the next, like an inheritance of sorrow. Time and again, leaders gathered, hands shook, cameras flashed. Agreements were signed with the promise that this would be the breakthrough. But behind the paper and pens lay mistrust, fear, and political games. Each promise collapsed into the dust of history. And so the conflict spilled beyond borders, into the parliaments of Europe, the rallies of America, the screens of social media. For some, Israel is the outpost of democracy in a hostile region. For others, Palestine is the last colony, waiting for freedom. But there is another vision, not of endless war, but of ordinary people who refuse to inherit hatred. Children who see each other not as enemies, but as neighbors. Men and women who believe that even the deepest wounds can one day heal. And now the world is being tested again. The flotilla sails. Governments argue. Armies wait. Every decision could tip the balance toward peace or toward another war. The question is no longer whether the world will watch. The question is, what will the world do? The Middle East is not just a regional conflict. It is a mirror. It reflects who we are and what we are willing to accept. Hatred, division, endless bloodshed, or the courage to build something different, something better. The story is not finished. The ending has not been written. And the truth is this: the fate of the Middle East will shape the fate of us all. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share this documentary. Start the conversation. Because only when the world pays attention does change become possible. And if you want to see more untold history, subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll uncover the truths that others forget and the stories the world cannot ignore.